All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the MiSC Society Podcast. My name is Ishdeep.
And I'm Hubert. If you've ever thought about working in genetics but weren't sure what that could look outside of research, this one is for you.
Today, we're diving into a career path that combines science, healthcare, and patient interaction in a really unique way. Joining us today is Jessica Hartley, the Program Director for the MSc in Genetic Counselling at the University of Manitoba.
And also an actual genetics counselor. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We're also very excited for this episode because genetic counseling is a field that not many people might know about, or it might be something that lots of genetic students are interested in, but they don't fully understand it. So to start us off, could you explain a little bit about what genetic counseling actually is?
Certainly. So genetic counseling is an allied health profession, and folks are trained in both aspects of clinical and medical genetics. So they have a great understanding of different genetic conditions, testing methodologies, molecular approaches, and that's balanced with counseling and communication skills. And so genetic counselors fit in a place in a health system where they're helping people understand really complicated information about genetics and genetic conditions and helping them interpret it in their own way and make meaning from that so that the patients feel empowered to make the choices that are right for them.
That sounds amazing. So what initially drew you to genetic counseling? Was this always something like occupation that you always had in mind?
Yeah, so I had heard about it when I was in high school from a guidance counselor as something that was interesting. But I kind of continued on my path in undergrad to do a degree in genetics. And I was in the space of learning about research, learning about different paths in that area. And I kind of returned to thinking about genetic counseling, I think when I took my human genetics course in third year or so of, I really want to work with people. I want to work in health. And kind of cycled back to considering it again at that point in time.
That's actually very interesting that you heard about it in high school because Hubert and I are both genetics majors, and I didn't first hear about it until that third year human genetics course.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely something that needs to be showcased a lot more for sure. So moving on, what does a typical day look like for you, with you as the program director, and then maybe for a genetic counselor that's working in the field itself?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll speak to what a role as a genetic counselor looks like first. So prior to transitioning over to an academic position, I worked as a genetic counselor in the Children's Hospital. And so I worked as part of a larger team with families who were either had children who had different medical conditions and were getting testing to determine if it was genetic, or I was working with families their child had been identified to have a positive newborn screening test. And so my role was primarily, I had clinic a couple times a week and would be in the clinic meeting with families to help them understand, what testing options were available, what are the next steps, and then if there is information to be shared about results, sharing that and helping them make meaning from it, not only for their child, but for future family planning, other family members, etc. So those clinic appointments I would have kind of at set schedules during the week. And then my in-between time was a little more self-driven. And so as you can appreciate, there are, thousands of different genes. I like to think I know all of the things about all of the genetic conditions. And so a lot of genetic counselor work in the clinical space is making sure that you've reviewed the most recent literature, making sure that you've got all the relevant information prepared to share with the patient.
Right.
And then there's also a number of kind of coordinating activities. And so I might be working with our diagnostic testing lab to choose what the most appropriate test is, given detection rates and those types of things. And then many genetic counselors also have some different educational things that they do. So some folks conduct research looking at different ways that we're providing service, or do teaching or supervision of genetic counseling students, physicians, physician assistant program. So I'd say many genetic counselors are kind of teaching or participating in the academic space in some capacity as well. So that's kind of a typical week for a genetic counselor who may work in a clinic. Mm-hmm. In terms of what my role as program director is, I do have some set things that I do still. So I teach the second year genetic counseling courses. And so those look at a variety of higher level counseling skills, as well as different kind of professional issues. So we talk about integrating approaches that are family centered, or practicing working with folks that are going through kind of life-changing information, and how do we help them navigate that. And then as well, kind of ensuring that our practice is in line with the diverse needs and identities of the people that we're caring for. And so making sure that our students are prepared for that environment as well. And then kind of other activities that are maybe less interesting, as I oversee the program budget and kind of manage reporting to our the folks that accredit our program. So every genetic counseling program has kind of a set of rules of what we must deliver. And so making sure that that's being followed and being met. So there's a lot of kind of review process as well. I supervise students in their research thesis. So that's been something that I've really enjoyed within the university. And I also see all of our students regularly from a mentoring process. So ensuring that they kind of have what they need to be successful in the program. I know that's a very long answer for both of those things.
No,
that was very
that's
comprehensive.
fantastic.
Yeah, very comprehensive. So it seems like genetics counseling has a lot of a multifaceted dimension where not only do you have clinical stuff, but you also have education, and you can also, like you said, if you step up in the admin position, you have all those bureaucracy that you have to go through. I mean, budgeting is not interesting, but it's actually
something you have to do.
Something you have to do, yeah.
Yeah.
So for students who want to get involved in genetic counseling, can you go over the educational requirements and the experience that you might need for these programs?
Yeah, so I'll speak kind of generally, and for any students that's thinking about coming into a program, I really encourage them to look at each program's website just to kind of make sure that they're checking the boxes. So most programs require some genetics courses in some facets, in things like human genetics or molecular genetics. Many programs recommend or require an embryology courses in statistics, to really help kind of prepare students for entry, as well as some courses in psychology. Everybody kind of defines those differently, just kind of knowing the diversity of courses available at different institutions. Assuming that a student kind of has met the course requirements, there are some other experiences that are really helpful. And so the first one is learning about genetic counseling in some fashion. And so thinking about how have you explored the program or explored what the career looks like? And for some people, that may be meeting with genetic counselors virtually, through, for example, through the Canadian Association of Genetic Counselors has a mentor match program. It may look like there's some simulated patient scenarios. So there's kind of a variety of resources online. Even there's a LinkedIn group called the Prospective Genetic Counselling Student
Wow.
Collaborative. And so they like share all kinds of events and materials and like different ways that, folks can explore. So I think that's really important in helping prospective students get a sense of like, is this for me?
Right.
And like, why? And I'd say those are really useful in then kind of taking that to apply it to your letter of intent if you're choosing to apply. I often get a question of shadowing is required to apply to a program.
Mm-hmm.
Hubert, I see you're smiling. So it is not. It's something that we recognize is not necessarily accessible for every applicant, kind of depending on where they're living, what they have available to them. And so there are lots of ways to learn about genetic counseling, and applications that have shadowing aren't rated any higher than applications who do not.
That's great to
and
hear.
There's so many different ways to gain exposure. And I'd say many genetic counselors, even if they can't have folks to shadow in their clinic, they are very keen to talk to students and tell them what they like about their job and some of the things that are kind of less enticing of it. And then I think the other two items, just with respect to applications, are some counseling experience. And so that's really a diverse way that some folks have done it. So it's either volunteering or work in some type of helping role. So for example, in Winnipeg, there are many folks that volunteer with Clinic with a K in the pregnancy program. There's been some folks that have volunteered for Kids Help Phone. There's a variety of kind of online counseling services that are available in like Canada and beyond. Like I think there's lots of different ways that people have kind of built those skills in active listening and in, I think giving perspective of like, can I sit with people who are going through tough stuff? And does that feel okay? Because that's going to be part of the career as well. And then you may have seen that our program has a research thesis. And so that's been something that many of our grads have been able to kind of develop project management skills and inquiry skills. And so if a student has experience in research previously, it's not required, but it's something that would be really helpful in kind of aligning with, stepping into doing a research thesis in the program.
Well, that's great. Thank you for breaking down quite a few of the myths that there are about applying to the genetic counseling program.
And so moving on, with how quickly genetics is advancing as a field, how do you see genetic counseling evolving in the future? Do you think genetics will become a more routine part of healthcare, at least in the public health system in Canada?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I've already seen it evolve a lot. Like I think throughout my career, we've moved from offering a genetic test, for example, for a single condition, like hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, to offering genetic testing more broadly, looking at the whole exome, looking at panels of hundreds of genes. And so I think our way of counseling has kind of changed a little bit. And it is genetic testing and genetics in general is becoming more integrated in other aspects of healthcare. So genetic counselors are working more collaboratively with other specialists like cardiology, for example, for hereditary cardiac conditions, or immunology. There are emerging areas where genetic counselors are starting to work with family doctors. And so I think with the smaller number of our profession, there is no way that the number of genetic counselors is going to rival the number of family doctors.
Right.
And so we are probably going to have some role in supporting other healthcare providers and providing that expertise in genetic testing, in counseling, and really supporting them in offering some more genetics in their practice in general. So there's an emerging process called mainstreaming. And so that's something that is being kind of considered and adapted in different spaces. So genetic counselors are collaborating with other healthcare providers to provide service just because there's not enough of us to do that.
Right. So it's a field that's very interconnected with almost all and every aspect of healthcare. And one thing that really stands out about genetic counseling is that it's not just about explaining the science. It's also about helping people make those really personal and sometimes very difficult decisions. So what does your role look like in those kinds of situations when patients are faced with complex or emotional decisions that are based on genetic information?
Yeah. And, I think education is something that is one aspect that I think a lot of people know about. Like, you come to a genetic counselor, you learn about something, and you kind of move on. I think the part about supportive counseling and informed decision making is new to some folks when they visit a genetic counselor. And a student said to me once, like, we're all just okay if people cry. And I think that's kind of part of the process, is like recognizing that reactions and emotions are part of healthy coping, are part of learning about life-altering news, and giving space for that is something that's validating and empowering. And so as a GC, if I'm sharing news that's going to change someone's life, I'm making sure that, we can go back to the information, but what are they thinking right now? What are they processing? How is this sitting with them? And then really in your encounter, getting a sense of, what's not being said. And sometimes picking up on different cues of body language or of what folks are saying or not saying, and asking questions to give space to talk about maybe emotions or feelings that are below the surface. And so sometimes there may be feelings of guilt or feelings of shame or, anxiety, and naming those and talking about those is part of the experience. And, identifying that this is normal, and this is part of the process. Ultimately, this isn't long-term counseling like one would have with a clinical health psychologist, but it's helping people respond to, the experience that they're having in the moment, and taking away with what they need to be like, I know what my path forward is. I know what my next steps are. And part of that are my reactions as a human being in this place. So
it's a very insightful answer. Yeah, it's great to see that part of what being a GC is having a good communication, understanding human reaction. I think empathy is a really important thing to have in healthcare, especially if you're a caregiver. So I imagine it's not always clear cut, right? It's not always a right answer. There's not always a right or wrong answer. It's not always binary. And I think this really shows how genetic counseling is not just about genetics. It's about people and helping them understand uncertainty, like what you said.
Now, one thing I did want to ask you is that we've heard about genetic counseling programs, especially throughout Canada. There's very few programs, and they're also very selective, meaning that there's very small class sizes within those programs. And I've always wondered why this is the case. Are you able to touch on that a little bit and share that with other students that might be wondering the same thing?
I get asked this question a lot, so I wasn't surprised. So on average, like across Canada, there's about just under 30 spots in genetic counseling programs. And then there's an additional kind of cohort of folks who attend Canadian or attend American programs as well. So I would say that the biggest limitation that many programs face is that as this is a clinical program, most of our students have to go and do placements and have clinical supervisors who are kind of teaching them the skills. And so, for example, in Manitoba, we have less than 20 genetic counselors in the province. And so with our kind of current cohort number, we really can't add more students without more supervisors. So we're hopeful that perhaps the health system, continues to recognize the good work that folks are doing. And if there's expansion in the health system, then that kind of directly feeds into like expansion in the number of spots. So I'd say that's the primary reason that the programs are generally small. I will say that, yes, there is a selection process, and I think sometimes it's kind of hard because you go to each program and you say, oh, University of Manitoba, they have 3 spots. How many people apply to University of Manitoba? And then you say, okay, 3 out of 70 people get in. That's really bad. And, as University of Manitoba, we see almost very common people between UBC and Toronto and McGill. So I will say like most applicants are applying to multiple programs. And so, for example, this year we met 24 people in interviews and 3/4 of them matched a program. And so, I think identifying that like there are ways to get there, and many programs are willing to provide feedback or provide resources to either if you've applied once and it didn't work out, or to kind of support people in the admissions process. So, well, the numbers kind of seem daunting. Collectively, we are seeing success from people that this is something that they want to do.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that could be slightly discouraging for students at first, seeing that there's only 3 spots in Manitoba. And then I'm not sure, but is the maximum class number in Canada, is it 6 people or somewhere? That's
University of BC has 8.
Okay. Yeah. And that's the maximum there is for that class size. But that's good to know that there's other resources out there, and then you can build your application up, and there's still hope for whoever wants to apply to the program.
Yep.
Right. So that was a really great conversation that we had about genetics counseling. Now we're going to switch things up a little bit with MiSC and Match.
So we're going to ask you some questions. This is like a rapid fire round of questions, no overthinking. Answer with the first thing that comes to mind. So I'll start with, if you weren't a genetic counselor, what would you be?
Ooh, I flip-flop between event planning because I like to plan a good party.
Right.
But if I was in healthcare, I might think about clinical health psychology.
Ooh, interesting.
So
now, do you
helping skills still? Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Do you prefer hospital setting or office setting?
I will say office for now. But I do like the busyness of a hospital setting that I don't get in my previous job.
That's a good point. Do you prefer early mornings or late nights?
Late nights for sure. I am not a morning now.
Now, do you like teaching students or working with patients more?
I will say students for now. I think there's lots of transferable counseling skills that are probably used in both spaces.
And that's what you're doing more now in your as program director as well.
Correct. Yeah. I'm not seeing patients currently in this role.
So do you have a comfort go-to TV show?
I will say that I've been rewatching some old episodes of Schitt's Creek recently, so I think that's been my
that's
go-to
a good
at
one.
the moment. Yeah.
Now, are you a stay in or go out type of person?
My husband would definitely say I'm a go out type of person.
Okay.
Because which he would probably choose stay in. So we have to balance
You have to
that.
find the balance.
The yin and yang.
What's something you wish that more people understood?
Each other, I think.
That's a good answer. We've never
That's
had
a
that
very,
one. Yeah.
very sweet
Yeah.
answer.
What's
That's
one?
like my counseling hat, I think.
What's one piece of advice that you always go back to?
Our questions are not as lighthearted as we hope today, I guess. We're going a little deeper than our usual misc and match.
Yeah. I think for this one, like taking time to think about what you want and being reflective. Like, I think I remember having a conversation with my dad when I was applying to programs and
Right.
the weight of decisions and, consequences and kind of acknowledging like you do what you can with what you have. And like, I think that's been something that I've applied.
Yeah. Giving grace to yourself, basically.
Yeah. And I think that probably applies a lot, like thinking about like probably everyone you talk to feels some like way of like feeling like an imposter in some space, like whether
Right.
it's like starting a new role, whether it's in a leadership position and like, kind of like acknowledging that like you do what you can with what you've got and like kind of helping yourself with that. So I'd say like that's probably my advice that I've been like thinking about consistently.
No, that's great. And I think
Yeah.
that is something that students especially need to remember, especially when it comes to going towards the end of your degree, applying for programs, and figuring out what you want to do with your life. It can be very overwhelming.
Yeah. All right. So that was great. I think we learned a lot. Uh-oh. Contamination alert.
It's time for our
Microbe of the week. And this one is a little different from usual. On theme with the topic of genetics, this week's quote-unquote microbe is actually going to be a gene. I hope Tally isn't mad at us for this. BRCA1 and BRCA2.
These are human tumor suppressor genes that normally help repair damaged DNA.
However, inherited harmful mutations in these genes impair the repair mechanisms, significantly increasing the lifetime risk of developing several different types of cancers.
And what's interesting is that people can carry these mutations without even knowing. And that's where genetic counseling plays an important role, helping people understand what these kinds of results actually mean.
So we wanted to ask, when someone finds out they have a BRCA mutation, how do you help them navigate that information and what comes next?
Yeah, I think that's a very common example of how genetic counselors who work in hereditary cancer help people. So, someone may find that they have a BRCA mutation or BRCA variant because they have someone in their family that has one already. And so they're getting predictive testing to learn are they at risk or not. And some people may have cancer and are trying to look for an explanation of like why this happened. And so for each of those situations, the genetic counselor would talk about, what the mechanism behind like why this has happened. Because, people have all kinds of explanations about, why did I get cancer? Is it something I did? Was it my experience? So helping people identify that this is not something in their control. And then sharing information about, what are the different inherited risks for different types of cancers and what can we do about it? And so genetic counselors work closely with gynae oncologists, for example, or folks in the breast screening domain to kind of set that person up with a plan of, we're going to check this frequently. Sometimes folks look at preventative surgeries. So especially for women who are at risk of ovarian cancer, they may choose to go for a surgery that removes the ovaries after they're done having their family, to reduce risk as well. And so genetic counselors are kind of giving some anticipatory guidance about, what the next information or options that person may have, and then kind of connecting to the folks who are going to either help them with surgeries, help them with screening, that sort of thing. And then talking a little bit more about okay, who else in the family could benefit from thinking about testing? And so part of those conversations with people are is testing right now? So for example, if somebody's 20 years old and isn't really sure if they want to know or not yet, sometimes it's okay to wait a couple of years to kind of, just like you were talking about people figuring out what their path is, this is just part of that, right? So, is testing right for you right now? And then, who are the people that we can put into place, like your healthcare team, to help reduce your risk? And, if we catch something early, and help people really feel empowered that they have a plan.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. All right, it looks like we're coming to the end of our of today's episode.
And we want to give a huge thank you to Jessica Hartley for joining us today and sharing your experiences and insights with us. This was a really eye-opening conversation, especially for students who are trying to explore different paths in science and healthcare.
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that there are so many ways to apply what you learn in science, and genetic counseling is such a unique example of that.
And for students listening, as we said, don't feel like you need to have everything figured out right away. Just keep exploring what interests you and stay open to different paths. There's so much out there, and there's so many different applications and courses that you can take that you might not even know about.
So thanks so much for tuning in into another episode of the MiSC Society Podcast.
We will see you all next week, and remember to stay curious,
stay connected,
and stay cultured.